It was a quiet Friday night when Sarah moved into her new apartment. She had been looking forward to living alone for the first time, relishing the peace and solitude. The building was old but charming, with creaky floorboards and walls that seemed to hum with history. Most of her neighbors were elderly, the type that minded their own business, which suited her perfectly. The first few nights went by without incident. Sarah spent her evenings unpacking, watching TV, and settling into her new home. But on the fourth night, something strange happened. At exactly midnight, her phone rang. Sarah was startled. It wasn't unusual to get a call, but something about the timing and the suddenness of it in the quiet apartment unnerved her. When she picked up the phone, there was no caller ID, just a private number. "Hello," she answered, her voice hesitant. There was no response, only silence on the other end. She waited for a moment before hanging up, thinking it was a wrong number or some kind of prank. The next night, it happened again. Midnight, the same private number. This time, Sarah hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice a little sharper, as if trying to hide her growing discomfort. Again, there was silence. Just as she was about to hang up, she thought she heard something. Faint breathing. Her heart started to race. "Who is this?" she demanded, but there was no answer. Only the sound of breathing, barely audible. She hung up quickly, her pulse pounding in her ears. By the third night, Sarah was on edge. She tried telling herself it was nothing, probably just some automated call, a glitch, but deep down, she knew that wasn't it. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was deliberately calling her, someone who knew she was alone. That night, she stayed up, staring at her phone, as the minutes ticked closer to midnight. At exactly 12 o'clock, her phone buzzed. The private number appeared on the screen. She didn't answer this time. She just watched as it rang, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent apartment. After it stopped, a voicemail notification popped up. With trembling hands, she played the message. There was no voice, no words, just the sound of someone breathing slowly, deliberately. It sent chills down her spine. She called her phone company the next day, hoping to trace the number or block the calls. But they told her there was nothing they could do with private numbers. Frustrated and afraid, Sarah started to dread nighttime. That night, she decided not to stay up. She locked her doors, checked her windows, and left her phone on silent. She hoped that by ignoring it, the calls would stop. But just as she drifted off to sleep, she was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of her phone vibrating on the bedside table. Even though she had silenced it, the persistent buzzing felt louder than ever. Her heart raced as she glanced at the clock. 12 a.m. The phone lit up with the familiar private number. This time, she let it go to voicemail immediately. But then, her phone vibrated again. Another call, then another. The phone buzzed relentlessly, each vibration a sharp stab of fear. Sarah grabbed it, her hands shaking, and threw it across the room. The buzzing stopped. But then, a knock came from the door. Software, barely audible. Sarah froze. She lived alone, and no one ever came by this late. She listened intently, hoping it was her imagination. Another knock. Her breath hitched. She crept toward the door, her footsteps silent on the creaky wooden floor. She peered through the peephole. At first, she saw nothing. But then, in the dim hallway light, she saw a figure, tall, standing, unnaturally still. It was too dark to make out any features. The figure just stood there, as if waiting. Sarah's blood ran cold. She backed away from the door, her mind racing. Should she call the police? But what would she tell them? That someone had knocked on her door? Then the knocking stopped. Silence filled the apartment once more. Sarah spent the rest of the night wide awake, every sound making her jump. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and she fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, she left the apartment early, unable to stand the eerie quiet that filled the place after last night. When she returned that evening, she checked the hallway. It was empty, as it had been before, but something caught her eye. On the floor, just in front of her door, was a small piece of paper. She bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling. Written in shaky, uneven handwriting were 3 words: "I'm still here." Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She scanned the hallway, but there was no one in sight. That night, she packed her bags and left the apartment for good. She never found out who the caller was or who had left the note. But every time she thinks about that apartment, she can still hear the faint sound of breathing and the quiet knock on the door.